Brandon looked at the roast beef sandwich in front of him and pushed it away. At one time, he loved his mom's homemade sandwiches. But now when he looked at the food, his stomach turned. "What's wrong, honey?" his mom asked with worry in her voice. "I'm not hungry," he said. He stood, but the sudden movement caused a sharp pain in his head, and he abruptly sat down. "You haven't eaten much all day," his mother frowned. "Maybe I can cook you something else." Brandon slowly shook his head. "I just ache all over, and the thought of food doesn't appeal to me right now," he said. He raised his hands to massage his temples. "It's all in his head," his father said to his mother. He spoke to her as if Brandon wasn't sitting across from him. But then his father looked up from his plate and stared at Brandon. "As far as I can see, the doctors can't find anything wrong with you." "It's not all in my head," Brandon said through clenched teeth. "The pain in my body is real, and it's called fibromyalgia, and there's no cure for it." "What I call it is laziness," his father said sarcastically. "Admit it, you couldn't hack law school, and this is your excuse for not finishing your degree. All you do all day is spend time in your room and sleep. I'm sure it was quite a hardship to come down for lunch." His father had voiced these things before, but today the words pushed Brandon over the edge. A streak of anger rushed to his chest, and before he realized what he was doing, he had grabbed his dish and threw it against the wall, shattering it. His mother let out a cry, and his father cursed at him. "I'm not lying about the pain in my body," Brandon said, staring at his father and breathing hard. The ache in his brain had intensified, and he no longer was able to ignore it. "I'm leaving," he said. Brandon went into his room and took a couple of his pain meds. He then began tossing clothes and the rest of his medication into his duffel bag. When he was done packing, he rummaged through his closet and pulled out his old camping gear. Before Brandon's fibromyalgia diagnosis, people had called him easygoing. But this sickness had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. Darkness consumed him, and he was either depressed or angry. He didn't know where the rage came from, but he knew that if he stayed home any longer, he might do something he'd regret. "Where are you going?" his mother asked as he went into the kitchen to grab some food. "I'm going camping," he said shortly. Brandon hopped into his car and headed toward the backcountry. He didn't exactly have a reservation at the campground, but he would sort that out when he arrived at the site. He was driving for nearly an hour when it started to drizzle. But he had already gone so far that he didn't want to turn back. The rain became heavier, and as he traveled north, he saw fewer and fewer cars. As he continued on his way, the storm moved directly overhead, and he could barely see beyond a couple of feet of his car. Brandon turned down a dirt road and continued to drive several more hours before he realized that he had made a wrong turn. This roadway was narrow, and it was nearly impossible to turn back. The only option he had was to continue onward. Brandon felt tension rise to his shoulders as lightning flashed over the trees. It was getting dark, and the storm wasn't about to finish anytime soon. He saw a puddle ahead, and he started to drive over it. Unfortunately, his poor judgment got his car stuck. Then panic and worry set in. "Come on," he muttered. He pressed down on the gas pedal, although that only made things worse. It looked like he truly was stuck in the mud. This realization heightened his stress level and triggered intense pain throughout his body. Brandon leaned his head helplessly on the steering wheel and began sobbing. 4 years ago, he was a triathlete at his university and was also training to compete in the half Ironman. His days were consumed with long-distance running, attending law lectures, and doing early morning cramming sessions. On occasion, he met with his friends to play beach volleyball. During one of those games, he dove for the ball. He missed the target and crashed into the sand, and on impact, he somehow injured his shoulder. The injury likely healed within a couple of months, but his acute pain never went away. Instead, it began to creep to other parts of his body. Brandon had felt invincible back then. He was always on the go and enjoyed an active social life. He even traveled to different parts of the world on his own. But now he couldn't do any of those things. The illness he had was invisible, and it attacked and tortured him from the inside. And on top of all of his misery, his own father refused to accept that his pain was real. Like a floodgate, his tears flowed freely, and he yelled and screamed at his misfortune. He was angry at the world, and didn't know why he was cursed with this illness. Brandon didn't know how long he cried, but his tears became spent. When he became aware of his surroundings, he noticed that the storm had passed. He cracked open the window and caught the soft rustling of leaves overhead. He also heard the sound of a crow cawing in the distance. But underneath those noises, he sensed a deep stillness that seemed to permeate the forest. It struck him that no matter how loudly he cried or screamed, the natural world continued. When Brandon woke the next morning, he was able to see the road more clearly. Then, after several tries, he managed to maneuver his car out of the mud. He drove until he reached the main road and decided to return home. In the 4 years since his diagnosis, Brandon had never allowed himself to mourn his loss. He distracted himself by getting into fights with his father. Then, when that was finished, he slunk back to his room and watched movies in an effort to numb his endless pain and depression. But since Brandon had released his anguish the night before, he was able to view things with more clarity. He couldn't accept the new changes that occurred in his body for many years. In fact, he had fought against it every step of the way. But it occurred to him now that he needed to embrace his new reality. It was unfair that he developed fibromyalgia after his accident, but holding on to his past made him feel trapped and destroyed him mentally. The only way to empower himself and move forward was to seek new and alternative ways to cope with his illness. And if he accepted that his life would never go back to how it was, he might finally be able to appreciate life and live again. What did you guys think of the story? Please comment in the comment section below. I can't wait to read your answers and discussions. Thanks for watching! And don't forget to like and subscribe to get the latest stories to warm your heart. Until next time, bye!